I'm Faith Cooper, and at 50, I thought my days of taking risks were behind me. Standing in the Phoenix Convention Center's industrial kitchen, surrounded by 20-something bakers with their fancy equipment and confident chatter, I wondered what the hell I was doing here. My hands trembled as I arranged my simple mixing bowls. The words I wanted to say stuck in my throat like thick honey. Damn aphasia. 3 years since the stroke that stole half my vocabulary, and I still felt like a stranger in my own mouth. The registration girl had looked puzzled when I'd signed up. Faith Cooper, the novelist? Her eyes widened with recognition, then quickly filled with pity when I struggled to respond. I managed a nod and pointed to my entry form. Sometimes silence worked better than my broken sentences. The Phoenix Autumn Baking Championship wasn't exactly where famous writers usually made comebacks, but desperate times called for desperate measures. My editor had been patient, but even patience had limits. I needed inspiration. Something to crack open the wall that had built up around my creativity. Across the kitchen island, a blonde woman caught my attention. 30s maybe, with cornflower blue eyes that sparkled when she laughed at something her neighbor said. She moved with practiced grace, measuring ingredients like a surgeon performing delicate operations. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and flour already dusted her apron. 90 minutes on the clock, announced the head judge. Your challenge? Create a dessert that tells your life story. My life story. What a joke. How do you bake a tale of lost words and lonely nights? I started with what I knew. My grandmother's pound cake recipe, memorized before words became my enemy. Butter, sugar, eggs. Simple things that didn't require explanation or eloquent description. The blonde woman, I heard someone call her Molly, was crafting something that smelled like cinnamon and autumn mornings. Apple tart, maybe? Her movements were confident, purposeful. She caught me staring and offered a genuine smile, not the careful, pitying expression I'd grown accustomed to. Smells amazing, I managed, the words coming out rougher than intended. Thanks. Family recipe. She paused, studying my face. You're Faith Cooper, aren't you? I nodded, bracing for the usual awkward exchange. I love Desert Bloom, read it twice. She didn't wait for a response, just went back to her work. No pity, no uncomfortable silence, just normal conversation. When time was called, the judges made their rounds. My cake looked plain next to the elaborate creations surrounding it, but I'd managed to drizzle it with honey and dust it with powdered sugar. Simple, honest. Then, I tasted Molly's apple cinnamon tart. Damn. It was like biting into a perfect fall day. Warm spices, tender apples, a crust that practically melted. But more than that, it tasted like home. Like belonging. Like all the words I couldn't say anymore. I started, then stopped. How do you describe perfection when your vocabulary has abandoned you? Molly was watching me, waiting. Not impatiently, just waiting. Beautiful, I finally whispered. She smiled, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt something stir inside me that wasn't frustration or loss. Something warm and unexpected and slightly terrifying. Would you like the recipe? She asked. I nodded, unable to trust my voice again. I'm Molly Roberts. I work at the Phoenix Speech and Language Center. She handed me a business card along with a hastily scribbled recipe. If you ever want to talk about, well, anything really. The judges announced the winners. Neither of us placed, but I barely heard them. I was staring at the card in my hand, at this woman who just offered me something I hadn't dared hope for. A chance to find my voice again. 3 weeks passed before I found the courage to call Molly. Her business card had lived on my kitchen counter, moving from one pile of mail to another, taunting me with possibilities I wasn't sure I deserved. The Phoenix Speech and Language Center occupied a cheerful building on Central Avenue, all glass and desert colors that somehow managed to look welcoming instead of clinical. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before walking in, rehearsing simple sentences in my head. Faith? Molly appeared in the lobby, looking genuinely pleased. She wore a soft green sweater that brought out her eyes, and her blonde hair was loose around her shoulders today. I wasn't sure you'd call. Took me time, I managed. That's okay, come on back. Her office was nothing like the sterile therapy rooms I'd endured at the hospital. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with novels alongside medical texts. A small kitchen corner held a coffee maker and what looked like homemade cookies in a glass jar. Coffee or tea? She moved with easy confidence, already reaching for mugs. Coffee, black? Straight to the point. I like that. She handed me a warm cup and settled across from me. So tell me about your aphasia. What's it like for you? Most therapists launched into technical questions about symptoms and severity scales. Molly just asked what it felt like. The difference caught me off guard. Like drowning, I said slowly. Words are there, can't reach them. That must be incredibly frustrating for someone whose life revolved around language. I nodded. Finally, someone who understood without long explanations. I've read all your books, she continued. Your prose was always so precise, so musical. That gift doesn't disappear, Faith. It just needs a different path out. For the next hour, she had me try exercises that felt more like games than therapy. We worked with word associations, melody patterns, even finger tapping. She never rushed me, never filled awkward silences with unnecessary chatter. You're doing great, she said as our session wound down. I know this feels overwhelming, but I can already hear improvements in your flow. Really? Really. Would you like to schedule regular sessions? I think we could make real progress together. Something in the way she said together made my chest tighten. Professional interest, I told myself, nothing more. Yes. Walking to my car, I felt lighter somehow. Like maybe the words weren't gone forever, just temporarily misplaced. By our fourth session, I was arriving early just to watch Molly work with other clients. She had this way of making everyone feel heard, valued. When she laughed at something I'd managed to express clearly, the sound went straight through me. You know what? She said after a particularly good session. I think you're ready for homework. Homework? I want you to try writing again. Not a novel, just thoughts. Stream of consciousness. Don't worry about grammar or complete sentences. Just let the words come however they want to. What if they don't come? Then you sit with the silence. Sometimes that's just as important. She was organizing papers on her desk, and I found myself studying the curve of her neck, the way afternoon sunlight caught in her hair. When she looked up and caught me staring, neither of us looked away immediately. The moment stretched between us, loaded with something I wasn't ready to name. Faith? Yes? I'm really glad you decided to call. The warmth in her voice, the way she was looking at me, not like a patient or a famous author, just like a woman she enjoyed being around, made something flutter deep in my chest. Me too, I whispered. When she walked me to the lobby, our hands briefly touched as she handed me my appointment card. The contact sent electricity shooting up my arm, and from the way Molly's breath caught, I wasn't the only one who felt it. Same time next week? She asked, her voice slightly breathless. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Driving home through Phoenix traffic, I couldn't stop thinking about that moment. It had been years since I'd felt attracted to anyone, and even longer since someone had seemed interested in return. But Molly was my therapist. There were boundaries, professional ethics to consider. Still, as I sat at my desk that evening with a blank notebook, the first words I'd written in 3 years came easily. Her eyes are the color of desert sky. Your insurance won't cover home visits, Molly said during our 6th session. But if you're interested, I could come to your place as a private client arrangement. I'd been making excuses to extend our appointments, lingering in her office until her next client arrived. The idea of having her in my personal space simultaneously thrilled and terrified me. Yes. My house sat on the outskirts of Phoenix, tucked into the desert foothills where saguaro cacti stood like silent sentinels. I'd bought it for the isolation after my stroke, needing space to hide from the world that no longer made sense. When Molly's blue Honda pulled into my driveway that first Thursday evening, I watched through the window like a nervous teenager. She climbed out wearing jeans and a flowing blouse, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. This place is incredible, she said, taking in the wall of windows that faced the desert. Do you write out here? Used to. I gestured toward the desk that had been gathering dust for months. Now it just stares at me. Maybe it's waiting for the right moment. We settled on my couch instead of the formal setup at her clinic. The change in environment shifted something between us. Our conversation flowed easier here, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared glances that lasted a beat too long. I brought something, Molly said, producing a container from her bag. Chocolate chip cookies. Thought you might want to try the recipe I mentioned. The cookies were still warm, obviously baked that afternoon just for me. As I bit into one, the gesture felt intimate in a way that had nothing to do with therapy. These are amazing. I managed around a mouthful of chocolate and butter. My grandmother's recipe. She always said baking was just another form of storytelling. How so? Every ingredient has a purpose, a role to play. Too much of one thing throws off the whole story, but when you get the balance right, she shrugged, smiling, magic happens. I was watching her lips as she talked, remembering the taste of chocolate and wondering what she would taste like. The thought shocked me with its intensity. Faith? You okay? Just thinking about balance. Our eyes met and held. The air between us felt charged, like the moment before a desert thunderstorm breaks. Tell me about your life before, she said softly. Before the stroke. Lonely, I admitted. Success, but lonely. Lots of casual relationships. Nothing that stuck. And now? Still lonely, but different somehow. Different how? I set down my cookie, gathering courage. Since meeting you, less lonely. The confession hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. Faith, I know this is complicated, I said quickly. You're my therapist. There are rules. There are. Her voice was barely above a whisper. But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you either. The admission hit me like electricity. She was thinking about me too. What do we do with that? I asked. Instead of answering, Molly moved closer on the couch, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something light and floral that made my head spin. Maybe we start by admitting it's happening, she said. And then? Then we take it one day at a time. Her hand found mine on the cushion between us, fingers intertwining naturally. The touch was gentle but deliberate, crossing the invisible line we'd been dancing around for weeks. Is this crazy? I whispered. Probably. She squeezed my hand. Does that matter? Before I could answer, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to mine. Soft, tentative, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't pull away. The kiss was everything I'd imagined and nothing I'd expected. Sweet from the cookies, warm and patient and real. When we broke apart, both of us were breathing hard. Damn, I breathed. Yeah. She rested her forehead against mine. Damn. We sat like that for a long moment, processing what had just shifted between us. Professional boundaries obliterated in a single kiss that tasted like chocolate and possibility. What happens now? I asked. Now you tell me if you want me to stay. I looked into her blue eyes, saw the vulnerability there, the hope mixed with uncertainty. Stay. 3 weeks into whatever this thing between us was becoming, I found myself counting hours between Molly's visits like a lovesick teenager. She'd officially terminated our therapeutic relationship, citing personal circumstances, though we both knew the real reason. I brought Chinese takeout, she announced, letting herself into my kitchen with the spare key I'd given her the week before. The casual intimacy of it still caught my breath. Perfect timing, I said, closing my laptop. For the first time in months, I'd actually been writing, not the brilliant prose that once made me famous, but honest words about rediscovering myself through someone else's eyes. We ate on the floor of my living room, backs against the couch, watching the desert sunset paint my walls gold and pink. These quiet domestic moments felt more revolutionary than any grand gesture. Sarah thinks I've lost my mind, Molly said, twirling lo mein around her chopsticks. Your friend the lawyer? She says dating a patient is career suicide, even a former patient. The word dating sent warmth through my chest. We hadn't defined what we were doing exactly, but hearing her claim it felt significant. Is that what we're doing, dating? Molly set down her container and turned to face me fully. What would you call it? Falling, I said without thinking. Her smile could have powered half a phoenix. Yeah, me too. Later, after the food was forgotten and we'd migrated to my bedroom, she traced patterns on my arm while I struggled to find words for what was happening to me. The physical intimacy had developed slowly, carefully, both of us acutely aware of the vulnerability involved. You don't have to explain everything, Molly whispered against my shoulder. Some things just are. But I wanted to try. After years of words failing me, I needed her to understand what she meant. You make me feel whole, I managed. Like the broken parts matter less. She lifted her head to look at me, blue eyes serious in the lamplight. You were never broken, Faith. Just reorganizing. The way she touched me felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. Patient hands that knew exactly how to make me forget every word except her name. When I returned the favor, she arched against me with soft sounds that were better than any poetry I'd ever written. Afterward, we lay tangled in sheets and moonlight, her head on my chest, my fingers in her hair. This was dangerous territory, the kind of intimacy that made you forget why you'd ever wanted to be alone. I should probably head home, she murmured without making any move to leave. Should and want are different things. True. She pressed a kiss to my collarbone. What do you want? You here, always. The admission surprised us both. I'd never been the type for grand romantic declarations, even before my stroke stripped away half my vocabulary. Always is a big word, she said carefully. Too big? She was quiet for so long I thought I'd scared her off. Then she lifted her head and kissed me deeply. Not too big, she whispered, just big enough. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and something sweet baking in my oven. Molly stood at my stove in one of my oversized shirts, hair messy from sleep, humming while she flipped pancakes. Good morning, beautiful, she said without turning around. Beautiful. When had anyone called me that and meant it? What's the occasion? I asked, wrapping my arms around her waist from behind. Do I need an occasion to spoil my girlfriend? Girlfriend. Another word that sent electricity through me. Is that what I am? She turned in my arms, spatula still in hand. If you want to be. I want to be a lot of things with you, I said, surprised by my own boldness. Such as? Happy, brave, myself. She kissed me softly, tasting like maple syrup and promises. I can work with that. Over breakfast, she told me about a new client at her practice, a teenager struggling with selective mutism. The way Molly's face lit up when discussing her work reminded me why I'd fallen for her in the first place. She saw broken things and believed they could be repaired. I started a new chapter yesterday, I told her. First one in 3 years. What's it about? A woman who thought her story was over. Then she met someone who helped her realize it was just beginning. Molly reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I'd like to read it sometime. It's rough. Probably terrible. I doubt that. But even if it is, rough drafts are supposed to be terrible. That's what makes them drafts. Later, after she'd left for work, and I was alone with my coffee and laptop, those words echoed in my head. Rough drafts were supposed to be terrible. Maybe the same applied to life. Maybe this messy, complicated thing we were building together was just our first draft at something beautiful. For the first time since my stroke, I wrote without stopping to second-guess every word. The idea came to me during our morning coffee ritual 6 weeks into our relationship. Molly was explaining her weekend plans, some spa retreat in Sedona that her friend Sarah had booked, when inspiration struck like lightning. What if you didn't go? I interrupted. What? She looked up from her toast, puzzled. Come away with me instead. Just us. Somewhere we've never been. The smile that spread across her face made my chest tighten with joy. Where did you have in mind? Flagstaff, mountain cabin. No phones, no work, no outside world. Faith Cooper, are you asking me on a romantic getaway? I'm asking you to run away with me for the weekend. She leaned across my kitchen table and kissed me thoroughly. Yes, absolutely yes. Friday afternoon, I packed light and headed to her apartment to pick her up. The drive to Flagstaff would take 2 hours through some of Arizona's most beautiful country. I'd reserved a cabin near the San Francisco peaks, complete with a fireplace and hot tub. 20 minutes from her place, the desert sky turned an ominous shade of brown. Dust storm season in Phoenix was unpredictable, but this one looked massive. I tried calling Molly to suggest postponing, but my phone couldn't find a signal. The wall of dust hit like a freight train. One moment I could see the highway clearly, the next I was driving blind through what felt like the end of the world. I slowed to a crawl, hazard lights flashing, following the taillights of the car ahead when I could make them out. That's when everything went sideways. Literally. The truck came from nowhere, sliding through the intersection I couldn't see. Impact on my driver's side sent my car spinning like a top. Glass exploded, metal screamed, then darkness swallowed everything. I woke up 3 days later in Phoenix General, confused and disoriented. A nurse with kind eyes was checking my IV line. Welcome back, Miss Cooper. You've been unconscious for 72 hours. Molly, I croaked. Need to call Molly. Let's focus on your recovery first. You suffered a serious head injury in the accident. The next few weeks passed in a pharmaceutical haze. Surgery to relieve brain swelling. Physical therapy to relearn basic movements. Speech therapy to rebuild pathways that trauma had damaged again. My aphasia had worsened significantly. Words that had been returning now felt completely beyond reach. But the cruelest blow came when I finally managed to convince a nurse to dial Molly's number. I'm sorry, Molly's voice said through the phone, distant and professional. I can't. Faith, they told me you were dead. The hospital called Sarah as your emergency contact because your phone was destroyed. They said Faith Cooper died in the accident. Not dead, I managed. I know that now. But Faith, I grieved you. I buried you in my heart. I can't go through that again. The line went dead. When I tried calling back, her number had been disconnected. Over the following weeks, I learned the truth through my social worker. Medical records had been mixed up in the chaos following a multi-car pileup. Someone with a similar name had died, but the families had been notified incorrectly. Molly had attended what she thought was my memorial service. By the time the mistake was discovered, she'd already begun the process of moving forward. The social worker mentioned, almost casually, that Molly had started seeing someone new, a doctor from the hospital where she'd completed her internship years ago. Dr. Rachel Bryant. I looked her up online from my hospital bed, torturing myself with images of a sharp-featured brunette with confident eyes and an impressive resume. Everything I wasn't anymore. When I was finally discharged 6 weeks later, I drove past Molly's apartment building. Her car was there, along with a silver sedan I didn't recognize. Through her living room window, I could see two silhouettes on the couch, sitting close together. I went home to my empty house and tried to write about loss, but the words wouldn't come. Not even broken ones. Instead, I started baking. Molly's chocolate chip cookie recipe, memorized from those perfect Thursday evenings that felt like someone else's life now. The first batch burned while I struggled to remember temperatures and timing. The second batch was edible but wrong somehow, missing some crucial ingredient I couldn't identify. Love, maybe. Hope. The belief that someone was waiting to taste what you'd made. I kept trying anyway. Cookies, muffins, the apple cinnamon tart that had brought us together. Each failed attempt felt like practicing for a performance that would never come. Late at night, I'd drive past the speech center where we'd met, hoping to catch a glimpse of her arriving for work. But her schedule must have changed, or maybe she was avoiding places that held memories of us. The loneliness was different now than it had been before her. Before, I'd been alone by choice, protecting myself from a world that demanded too much. Now I was alone because the one person who'd made connections seem possible believed I was gone. 3 months after the accident, I finally worked up the courage to leave something at her clinic. A box of cookies with a note. For the woman who taught me words could be medicine. Thank you for everything. F. I didn't sign my full name. Didn't want to shock her or cause pain. Just wanted her to know that somewhere in Phoenix, someone remembered the gift she'd given. The next morning, the box was gone. The day I first saw Molly with Rachel, I was leaving the grocery store near her apartment. 3 months had passed since my last cookie delivery, and I'd started to convince myself I was healing. Then I spotted them at the coffee shop across the street. Molly looked radiant. Her blonde hair caught the afternoon sunlight as she laughed at something Rachel was saying. The brunette doctor leaned across their small table, fingers brushing Molly's hand in a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching them through the window. Rachel was everything I wasn't, articulate, confident, whole. When she kissed Molly goodbye, it was brief but comfortable. The kiss of two people who'd settled into routine. That night, I baked until my hands cramped. Snickerdoodles this time, rolled in cinnamon sugar that reminded me of autumn mornings. I left them at the clinic with no note, just hoping Molly would recognize the recipe from a conversation we'd had about her childhood favorites. The deliveries became my ritual. Every few weeks, I'd appear before dawn to leave fresh cookies, muffins, or pastries. Never the same thing twice. Never with identification. Just anonymous gifts from someone who remembered what made her smile. I told myself it was enough. That knowing she was happy should be sufficient. But watching them together became an addiction I couldn't break. I learned their patterns. Tuesday dinners at the Italian place downtown, Saturday morning hikes in South Mountain Park, Sunday brunch at the cafe where I'd first seen them. I was a ghost haunting the periphery of their happiness. One Tuesday evening, I followed them to Rachel's house in the foothills. Through the living room window, I could see them cooking together, Rachel's hands guiding Molly's as they prepared what looked like stir-fry. The domestic intimacy of it cut deeper than any grand romantic gesture could have. They looked settled, content, like two people building something real together. I started writing letters I never sent. Pages and pages of things I wanted to tell Molly, about the accident, about the mix-up, about how thoughts of her had kept me conscious during those first dark weeks. But every draft ended up in the trash. What right did I have to disrupt her new life with my resurrection? My speech had improved slightly with the new therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Martinez, who didn't ask about my previous treatment. But the progress felt hollow without Molly there to celebrate small victories. Christmas came and went. I spent it alone, watching old movies and eating takeout Chinese. The emptiness felt different than before. Not the chosen solitude of someone avoiding connection, but the desperate isolation of someone who'd tasted paradise and been exiled. In January, I saw them at the bookstore. Rachel was browsing the medical texts while Molly wandered the fiction section. She picked up my latest paperback, a reprint from before my stroke, and studied the author photo with an expression I couldn't read. For a moment, I thought about approaching her, just walking up and saying hello, letting her see I was alive. But then Rachel appeared with an armload of textbooks, sliding her arm around Molly's waist with easy possession. "Find anything interesting?" Rachel asked. "Just remembering an old friend," Molly said, putting my book back on the shelf. An old friend. Was that all I'd become to her? A memory filed away with other pleasant experiences from her past? I left the store feeling more dead than I had in the hospital. Spring arrived with its brutal Phoenix heat, and I noticed changes in their routine. They seemed to be spending more time at Rachel's house, less at Molly's apartment. When I drove past Molly's place one evening, a for rent sign sat in the yard. She was moving in with Rachel, making it official. The realization hit me like another car accident. Whatever small hope I'd been nurturing, that maybe their relationship was temporary, that maybe I still had a chance, died in that moment. That night, I baked one final delivery. Molly's grandmother's apple cinnamon tart, the recipe she'd shared during those perfect early weeks when anything seemed possible. I'd finally perfected it after months of practice, getting the spice blend exactly right. I left it at the clinic with a longer note than usual. Some recipes are worth preserving, even when the original cook has moved on. I hope life brings you every happiness you deserve. Always, your anonymous baker. This time, I meant it as goodbye. Walking back to my car at dawn, I felt lighter somehow. Not healed, not whole, but ready to stop haunting the edges of someone else's life. Molly had found love after grief. That was what mattered. As I drove home through empty Phoenix streets, I didn't look back at the clinic. Some stories end with the lovers reunited. Others end with letting go. I thought mine was the second kind. The knock on my door came at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, 3 days after I'd left my final delivery. I almost didn't answer. Visitors were rare in my self-imposed exile, but something about the persistence of the knocking made me curious. Molly stood on my doorstep, holding a plate of familiar-looking cookies. "Apple cinnamon tart," she said without preamble. Perfect spice blend, just like my grandmother used to make. I stared at her, my brain struggling to process her presence. She looked different, thinner maybe, with dark circles under her blue eyes. Beautiful still, but worn down by something I couldn't identify. "How did you know?" I finally managed. "The handwriting, the recipes, the way you always left them before dawn." She stepped closer, studying my face like she was seeing a ghost. "Faith, what the hell happened to you? You want to come in?" She nodded, following me into my living room. The familiar space felt different with her in it again, smaller somehow, charged with 3 months of unspoken words. "They told me you were dead," she said, settling onto my couch. Sarah got the call. Official notification. They said Faith Cooper died in a car accident. Medical records, mixed up. Took weeks to sort out. "Weeks?" Her voice cracked. "I grieved you, Faith. I went to what I thought was your memorial service. I brought flowers to a grave that wasn't even yours." The pain in her voice cut straight through me. I'd been so focused on my own loss that I'd never fully considered what she'd been through. The trauma of sudden death, the guilt of moving on, the shock of discovering I was alive all along. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Sorry?" She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "I spent 3 months learning to live without you. 3 months convincing myself that what we had was just some kind of temporary madness. Then I find out you've been alive this whole time, watching me, leaving me cookies like some kind of benevolent ghost? Didn't want to disrupt your life. You looked happy." "Happy?" She whirled around to face me. "You think I looked happy?" "With Rachel. I saw you together. Looked settled." "Settled." She laughed bitterly. "Yeah, I suppose that's one word for it." Something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. The tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched at her sides. This wasn't the contentment I'd observed from a distance. "Rachel and it's complicated," she continued. "She's a good person, stable. Everything I thought I needed after losing you. But she's not you." The words hung between us like a bridge I was afraid to cross. After months of watching her build a life without me, this admission felt too fragile to trust. "Molly, do you have any idea what it's like to be with someone and constantly wish they were someone else? To feel guilty every time they touch you because you're thinking about another woman's hands?" She was crying now, tears streaming down her face as months of suppressed emotion finally broke free. I wanted to comfort her but didn't know if I had the right. "Why didn't you tell me you were alive?" she demanded. "Why let me think I'd lost you forever?" "Because you moved on. Because you were better without me." "Better?" She crossed the room in 3 quick steps, standing directly in front of me. "Faith, I was dying inside. Every day with her felt like I was betraying your memory, but I couldn't let myself grieve forever, so I tried to build something new, something safe. And now? Now I don't know anything anymore." Before I could respond, she cupped my face in her hands and kissed me. Hard, desperate, full of 3 months of pent-up longing and frustration. I kissed her back just as fiercely, my hands tangling in her blonde hair. When we broke apart, both of us were breathing hard. "I've missed you so much," she whispered against my lips. "Miss you too, every day." "This is insane," she said, but she didn't pull away. "I'm with Rachel. I can't just—" "I know. But I can't stop thinking about you either. About what we had, what we could have." "What do you want, Molly?" She was quiet for a long moment, her forehead resting against mine. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I want to choose you, but I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of losing you again. Of disrupting everything I've built. Of admitting that the last 3 months were just me running from the truth." I pulled back to look at her, seeing the fear and hope warring in her blue eyes. "What's the truth?" "That I never stopped loving you. That Rachel is wonderful, but she's not the woman I want to spend my life with. That I've been a coward, hiding behind safety instead of fighting for what I really want." "And what do you really want?" She kissed me again, softer this time but no less intense. "You, us, another chance to get it right. Even though I'm more broken now than before?" "We're all broken in some way. The question is whether we're broken in compatible ways." For the first time in months, I felt something like hope stirring in my chest. Not the desperate hope of someone watching from the shadows, but the real possibility of rebuilding something beautiful from the ashes of what we'd lost. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now I have to go end things with Rachel. She deserves honesty, not someone who's been emotionally unavailable for months. And then? Then we figure out what comes next, together." 2 weeks passed before Molly called, the longest 2 weeks of my life, filled with doubt and second-guessing. Had I imagined the electricity between us? Had she changed her mind after talking to Rachel? When she finally showed up at my door on a Thursday evening, she looked exhausted but determined. "It's done," she said simply. How did she take it? Better than I expected, worse than I hoped. Molly stepped inside, setting down a bottle of wine and a bag from the Italian place we'd never been to together. She said she'd been waiting for me to stop pretending she was someone else. That honesty cut deep. Rachel hadn't deserved 3 months of Molly's divided heart. "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be. She's stronger than both of us. Said she'd rather have the truth than comfortable lies." Molly moved into my kitchen with familiar ease, finding wine glasses without asking. Besides, she's already got a date lined up with some cardiologist from her hospital. I watched her pour wine, noting how her hands shook slightly. This couldn't have been easy for her. Regrets? I asked. Only that I waited so long. She handed me a glass, her fingers brushing mine deliberately. I kept thinking about what you said before the accident, about falling. Still falling? Harder than before? We ate dinner on my back patio, watching desert stars appear in the darkening sky. The conversation flowed like it had in our early days, easy, intimate, full of the recognition that comes from truly understanding another person. I brought something for you, she said as we cleared dishes. Professional consultation. From her bag, she produced a thick folder of research papers and therapy techniques. New approaches for aphasia recovery. Some promising studies out of Johns Hopkins about combining traditional speech therapy with creative writing exercises. I flipped through the pages, amazed by her thoroughness. She'd been researching ways to help me even while we were apart. You want to be my therapist again? I want to be your partner in every sense of the word, including helping you find your voice again. Partner. The word hit me like electricity. What did you have in mind? A cookbook, she said, eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. Recipes paired with writing prompts. Food has always been about storytelling for both of us. Maybe we can use that connection to rebuild your relationship with words. The idea was brilliant. Food and language, taste and memory, all the things that connected us from the very beginning. We'd work on it together? If you want. CO authors, equal partners. I set down the research papers and pulled her close, needing to feel her reality against me. She came willingly, wrapping her arms around my neck. I love you, I said, the words clearer than they'd been in months. Some truths demanded perfect pronunciation. I love you too, she whispered back. This time when we kissed, there was no hesitation, no guilt about other obligations, just two people who'd found their way back to each other despite impossible circumstances. Later in my bedroom, we moved with the careful intensity of lovers reunited. Every touch felt like reclamation. Every kiss a promise that this time we wouldn't let external circumstances tear us apart. When she arched beneath me, calling my name, it sounded like coming home. Afterward, we lay entwined in the darkness, her head on my chest, my fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. The cookbook idea is genius, I said into the quiet. I've been thinking about it for months, wondering if food could be the bridge back to language for you. Why didn't you suggest it before? When we were... Before? Because then it would have been me fixing you. This way, we're creating something together, as equals. I understood the distinction and loved her even more for making it. Over the following weeks, we threw ourselves into the project with the passion of people making up for lost time. Mornings meant writing sessions at my kitchen table, experimenting with recipes and the stories they told. Afternoons were for testing and retesting, until we got both the food and the words exactly right. Molly's friend Sarah proved surprisingly supportive, offering to review our publishing contracts and helping us navigate the business side of collaboration. I was wrong about you two, she admitted over coffee one afternoon. I thought Molly was being reckless, but watching you work together, this is partnership, real partnership. By summer, we had 30 recipes with accompanying essays, each one a small victory over the silence that had nearly claimed me. My publisher was intrigued by the concept, especially with Molly's therapeutic credentials lending credibility to our approach. It's not just a cookbook, she told them during our pitch meeting. It's proof that creativity and healing can be the same process. The advance was modest, but enough to let us focus fully on the project. We developed a routine that felt sustainable, writing in the mornings when my words came easiest, recipe testing in the afternoons, evenings reserved for each other. One night, as we cleaned up after perfecting her grandmother's apple cinnamon tart for the final time, Molly turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What if this becomes something bigger than just a book? She asked. What do you mean? A real business, combining your writing with my therapy background, helping other people find their voices through food. The idea sent excitement racing through me. Not just recovering my own abilities, but helping others discover theirs. You think it could work? I think we could change lives, she said simply. Standing in my kitchen, flour in her blonde hair and tomorrow's possibilities stretching before us, I knew she was right. We'd found our way back to each other, and now we could help others find their way too. Partners? I asked, extending my hand. Partners, she agreed, shaking it solemnly before pulling me close for a kiss that tasted like cinnamon and second chances. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of our new Phoenix business, watching Molly demonstrate kneading techniques to a group of clients struggling with various forms of aphasia. The space we'd designed together combined professional therapy equipment with commercial baking facilities, a first of its kind in Arizona. Sweet Words Therapy and Baking Center had exceeded every expectation we'd dared harbor. Our cookbook topped bestseller lists for 6 consecutive weeks, leading to speaking engagements and a waiting list of clients from across the country. Remember, Molly told the class, her blonde hair pulled back under a flour-dusted bandana, bread doesn't judge your words, it just needs your hands and your patience. I smiled, updating notes for tomorrow's writing workshop. My own speech had improved dramatically through our methods, not perfect but functional enough to co-teach classes and conduct interviews about our techniques. The morning session ended with clients taking home fresh loaves and homework assignments, recipe journals where they'd document not just ingredients but memories and emotions connected to their cooking. Good class today, I told Molly as we cleaned up. Mrs. Henderson actually spoke a full sentence when her bread came out perfectly. Did you hear that? I had. The elderly woman who'd been nearly mute since her stroke had exclaimed, "Look how beautiful it turned out," with tears of joy streaming down her face. These moments made every struggle worthwhile. Speaking of beautiful outcomes, Molly said, pulling something from her apron pocket. I have news. She handed me a letter from the Phoenix Business Journal. We'd been nominated for Entrepreneurs of the Year, specifically in the healthcare innovation category. This is incredible, I managed, reading the formal notification twice. There's more. Her blue eyes sparkled with barely contained excitement. The nomination comes with automatic entry into the state competition. If we win that, we go national. National recognition would mean franchising opportunities, the chance to spread our approach to other cities. The scope of possibility felt overwhelming in the best way. What do you think? She asked. I think we should celebrate. That evening, we returned to the Phoenix Convention Center, the same venue where we'd first met during the baking championship. This year's spring competition was in full swing, and Molly had surprised me with entry forms for the couples division. Are you serious? I stared at the paperwork she'd filled out without consulting me. Dead serious. Time to come full circle. Standing in that familiar industrial kitchen, surrounded by competitive bakers and time pressure, I felt the ghost of my former isolated self. But this time, I wasn't alone. Molly worked beside me with practiced efficiency as we prepared our signature apple cinnamon tart, the recipe that had brought us together, perfected through months of collaboration. 30 minutes remaining, announced the head judge. Our tart was already in the oven, filling the air with cinnamon and promise. Other teams rushed frantically around us, but Molly and I moved in synchrony, born of countless hours working together. You know what? I said, watching her add final decorative touches to our dessert display. What? Win or lose, I'm proud of what we've built. She paused, looking up at me with an expression so full of love it took my breath away. Faith Cooper, are you getting sentimental on me? Maybe. Is that a problem? Instead of answering, she kissed me right there in front of judges and competitors and anyone else who cared to watch. A claim stake, public and unashamed. When they announced the winners 30 minutes later, our names weren't called. But as we packed up our tools, I felt only satisfaction. We'd created something more valuable than any trophy. Disappointed? Molly asked. Not even a little. We already won. How do you figure? I gestured toward our leftover tart, toward the business cards we'd distributed to interested spectators, toward the life we'd built from broken pieces and second chances. Look around. This is everything I never knew I wanted. Walking to our car through the Phoenix evening, her hand warm in mine, I marveled at the journey that had brought us here, from that first tentative taste of her grandmother's recipe to building a business that helped others find their voices. It felt like the best kind of plot twist. One more surprise, Molly said as we reached my truck. From her purse, she produced a small velvet box that made my heart stop entirely. Faith Cooper, she said, dropping to one knee right there in the convention center parking lot. You taught me that the best stories don't follow predictable patterns. They take surprising turns that lead to even better endings. My hands shook as she opened the box to reveal a simple platinum band with a small diamond that caught the parking lot lights like captured starfire. Will you marry me? The words I wanted to say got tangled in emotion and the lingering effects of aphasia. But some moments transcend language entirely. Yes, I whispered. Then louder, clearer, yes, absolutely yes. The ring fit perfectly, like everything else about us, unexpectedly right after all the wrong turns that had led us here. Later, celebrating over champagne in my kitchen, I thought about the woman I'd been before meeting Molly. Successful but lonely, articulate but emotionally mute. The accident had stripped away my words, but loving her had taught me that some things didn't need language to be understood. So what's next for us? She asked, admiring the ring on my finger. Everything, I said, pulling her close for another kiss. Absolutely everything. Outside, Phoenix glittered under desert stars, full of possibility and second chances. And inside our home, two women who'd found each other against impossible odds planned a future as sweet and unpredictable as the perfect recipe. Equal parts love, patience, and faith in flavors yet to be discovered.